Rhaegar Targaryen stood on the narrow balcony of Maegor's Holdfast, the chill night air wrapping around him like a cloak of silent dread. The wind brushed across the battlements, carrying whispers of the past and promises of the future he could only half believe in. He was a man of quiet intensity, who had discovered in his youth that the pursuit of prophecy and the weight of duty could be heavier than plate armor. The realm had come to a point of crisis, a brittle moment in time where the swiftest breeze could topple an entire dynasty. Down in the courtyard, torches flickered, revealing the black-swathed shapes of the king's guard and the red-garbed Lannister guardsmen loitering by the gates. A sense of mounting dread clung to the shadows. It was a dread that Rhaegar felt, like a deep drumbeat in his chest that forewarned him of what needed to be done if his beloved homeland was ever to find peace. He closed his eyes and pictured his father, King Aerys II Targaryen, pacing the Red Keep's halls. The man who had once stood tall as a promising ruler had long since eroded into paranoia, cruelty, and the savage desire to see his enemies burn. Rhaegar had grown up in the lonely glow of that madness. He had watched his father's eyes widen with suspicion at every imagined slight, and over the years the prince had borne silent witness to the countless atrocities that had marred House Targaryen's name. When Rhaegar was a boy, he had believed that if only he could fulfill the prophecies he so cherished, the realm could be saved. But Aerys's darkness had grown like a cancer, overshadowing any chance for redemption. Even Rhaegar's reputation for gentleness, his bookish nights, his earnest musical pursuits, could not overshadow the truth that the Targaryen throne was stained with blood and sorrow. Many said that Rhaegar was the best hope for the Targaryen line. The lords of the realm had whispered in corners that one day he would rule more justly and more wisely than Aerys ever had. Some claimed he possessed the nobility of spirit the realm sorely needed. Yet rumor alone could not stop a king's madness nor quell a rebellion. War had broken out in the wake of Rhaegar's alleged abduction of Lyanna Stark, a scandal that ignited an already simmering distrust. The rebel forces, led by Robert Baratheon, Eddard Stark, and Jon Arryn, had waged open war against the crown. Rhaegar himself had nearly turned the tide at the Battle of the Trident, but fate or prophecy had placed him out of position too often and led him to delays, giving the rebels time to gather strength. Now, words of steel and wildfire blossomed across the land. The rumors that Aerys intended to set King's Landing ablaze with caches of wildfire had tormented Rhaegar's mind for months. Though the war was fierce, Rhaegar still believed victory might be possible if King's Landing and its people were spared from his father's lunacy. But then again, the deeper question weighed on him. Was victory for House Targaryen even just if it relied upon the threat of atrocities so vile that children and innocents would burn? He was torn between duty and conscience. Prophecy told him he was born for greatness, the prince that was promised, destined to bring balance to the realm. Yet what kind of prince would he be if he allowed his own father's insane cruelty to reign unchecked? That night, on the balcony, he thought through all the possible futures. Rhaegar had studied prophecy so obsessively, seeking comfort in the idea that some cosmic plan existed beyond mortal cruelty. Perhaps a part of him hoped that if he followed every riddle, every stanza in the ancient scrolls, he might find a path to a realm in harmony. For years, he had believed that the key lay in the Child of Dragons, the Song of Ice and Fire. Yet each swirl of the prophecy always brought him back to a fundamental truth. It was his responsibility to shape the future, not simply wait for it. If Aerys continued to reign, the realm would bleed and eventually burn. If he, Rhaegar, stood by and did nothing, he would be complicit. And if he challenged his father openly, he would be branded a kinslayer in the eyes of Westeros. The accusations of kinslayer might be more bearable than the screams of thousands as they died in flames. He rested a hand on the hilt of his sword. He had always preferred the harp to a blade, yet life had compelled him to mastery of both. In the softness of moonlight, he heard the faint echo of notes from a long-forgotten song, one he had composed as a younger man dreaming of the 7 kingdoms brought to harmony. The memory stung. There would be no harmony under Aerys. The realm demanded an act of finality. The burning of Rhaegar and Brandon Stark had been the first sign that King Aerys had lost all reason, all decency. Their tortured deaths had set a series of tragedies in motion that were sweeping across the land. But not even those horrors were enough to galvanize many of the still loyal lords. Fear of Targaryen dragons, or the memory of them, still held them in line. Yet Rhaegar knew, intimately, that no real dragons remained, only illusions and echoes of an older age. What burned now was simply wildfire, not dragonfire. Aerys's fire was not the sacred breath of a living dragon, but the twisted green flames he so adored in his madness. A slight scrape on the stones behind him startled Rhaegar from his grim reverie. He turned to see Ser Jaime Lannister, the youngest member of the Kingsguard, approach. A swirl of gold and white reflected in the torchlight, and Rhaegar could see the man's face. A curious blend of arrogance and uncertainty. The Kingslayer in the making, though Rhaegar had no way of knowing that name would eventually cling to Jaime. Yet even then, Rhaegar could guess that Jaime's devotion to his father was half-hearted at best. Jaime's voice was hushed. "My prince, the king summons you to his solar. He has plans for the city's defenses. He demanded your counsel." Rhaegar forced himself to show no fear. He nodded, turned from the balcony, and followed Jaime's measured footsteps through the labyrinth of dark corridors and twisting passages. The Red Keep seemed to groan under the weight of secrets, each stone a silent witness to cruelty and heartbreak. Tapestries of Targaryen conquests hung along the walls, but Rhaegar found them oppressively somber. They seemed less like trophies now and more like accusations. "You have let this madness fester," they seemed to say. "You did nothing while your father slid deeper into mania." Outside the king's solar, two gold-cloaked guards stepped aside. The thick wooden door yawned open, revealing King Aerys Targaryen perched on a chair shaped like a dragon's mouth. His unkempt silver hair brushing his shoulders, his nails grown long and twisted. The sharp odor of rancid sweat, a scent that no bathing routine could fully banish, hung in the air. Bits of spittle clung to the corners of his mouth as he turned wide, suspicious eyes on his son. Rhaegar met that gaze calmly, striving to feel no pangs of love nor revulsion. He had once loved his father as any child might. Now, all that remained was a sorrowful acceptance that the man was entirely lost to reason. Aerys's voice trembled with mania. Come, my precious boy. They say the rebels have sacked half our loyal lords and that Robert Baratheon prowls the Stormlands like a rabid dog. But we still have teeth, yes. We have claws." He giggled, though there was nothing mirthful about the sound. "I've spoken with Lord Rossart. He will help me gather more of the wildfire. We shall fill the city. Under the Great September, the Guildhall of the Alchemists, even the slums of Flea Bottom. We will turn them all into cinders if the usurpers dare come near, and we'll burn them all. Burn them in a single breath of green flame, even Tywin Lannister, if he chooses to betray me. All of them." Rhaegar inclined his head slightly, hoping his revulsion was hidden behind a mask of cool composure. "Yes, father. If the city burns, though, how will we remain kings of ash and ruin? We would have no people left to rule." Aerys narrowed his eyes, suspicion flaring. "And are you a traitor too? Shall I burn you and your children as well?" A raw cackle split the air. Speak quickly. I will not stand for disloyalty." The prince felt a chill coil through his stomach at the question. He forced himself to bow. "My only wish is to protect the city, father. The people are ours to guard. If we defend King's Landing with more strategic means, if we only target the rebel hosts..." "Enough! You think me blind, do you? You think me weak?" Spit flew from the king's lips. "You want to deny me my rightful vengeance. But I am the dragon, and I will not be denied. If the city falls, we all burn together. Do you hear me?" He rose, and the presence of the king's guard behind him seemed overshadowed by the ragged madness in his eyes. "Leave me," he snapped, "or I will burn you here and now." Rhaegar had no choice but to bow again, retreating backward as calmly as he could manage. Jaime Lannister, silent and watchful, lingered only for a moment to eye the king with an unreadable expression, then followed Rhaegar out. They stepped back into the corridor, and the door slammed shut behind them. Through the thick wood, They could still hear the mutterings of the Mad King, plotting the destruction of everything he should have protected. As they walked, Rhaegar's mind was alive with reflection. There was no question now. Aerys intended to kill every man, woman, and child in King's Landing should the rebels break through. This was not the Targaryen way of old, not even the cruelty once displayed by Rhaegar the Cruel. This was something else, a megalomaniac's final gambit against the perceived betrayals of the entire world. And if Rhaegar waited until after the Battle of the Trident to seize power, he might return home victorious, only to find the city in flames. He came to a stop in a secluded corner of the keep, the stone walls damp with the moisture from the Blackwater rush. Jaime halted beside him, frowning. There were no guards within earshot, only the flickering shadows of torchlight. Rhaegar turned to Jaime and spoke softly, his voice more resolute than the Kingsguard had ever heard it. "We must do something. If the king truly intends to set wildfire throughout the city, then all of his subjects are at risk, along with the entire royal family. My family." Here, he thought of Elia Martell, his gentle, intelligent wife, and of their children Rhaenys and Aegon. They were in the Red Keep, potential hostages to Aerys' mania. "Tell me, Ser Jaime, do you still believe in protecting the realm? The vow of a Kingsguard is to guard the king. But what if the king is bent on murdering thousands of innocents?" Jaime's features stiffened. He was still young, still flush with the illusions of knighthood, but he was not blind to the horrors Aerys had inflicted. "I swore an oath," he said, almost as if he were reminding himself. "But I also swore to protect the innocent. I swore to protect the weak. I cannot stand by and watch him destroy King's Landing." Rhaegar nodded gravely. "Nor can I. My father is lost in his fantasies of green flame and vengeance. If we do not act, we will be judged by the gods for standing by while tens of thousands die. You are still a Lannister, Jaime. If I cannot persuade you to help me, perhaps your father could be swayed to reason. Lord Tywin might see the sense in preventing the destruction of the capital." But Jaime's mouth twitched, and he shook his head. "My father remains outside the city, biding his time. I don't know what he plans. However, I do know that if Aerys suspects Tywin of disloyalty, the king could slaughter half the Lannister host in retribution. He's that mad. There's no telling what might happen if Tywin marched on the city. And I can't say for certain my father would choose the side of mercy. His sense of honor is overshadowed by ambition." Rhaegar let out a long breath. "So it falls to me." His voice felt hollow as he said it. All his life, he had tried to be the kind of prince who led with fairness and valor, but that path had never included regicide or patricide. And yet, for the sake of the realm, for the sake of the prophecy and his children, could he truly shirk this duty? He spent the following days in a state of silent, dreadful preparation. Uncertain rumors floated among the courtiers that King Aerys was summoning pyromancers day and night, that the main gates were being rigged with hidden flasks of wildfire, that the king's network of spies was scouring the city for any sign of disloyalty. Food was becoming scarce, for the roads in and out of King's Landing were increasingly unsafe, and many common folk feared the worst. Something unholy was stirring in the Red Keep. The normal protocol for a prince was impossible now, overshadowed by the knowledge that each passing day brought the war closer to the walls, and each passing day brought Aerys closer to lighting the spark that would engulf the city. Finally, Rhaegar requested a private meeting with his father late into the night. He made sure to mention he had discovered a new vantage for unleashing wildfire upon the rebels, some pretext that would intrigue Aerys. He also had Ser Barristan Selmy and Ser Jon Darry posted nearby, men he trusted, though he told them nothing of his deeper purpose. In his bedchamber, he prayed to the Seven, not for victory in war, but for the strength to do what must be done. He touched the rubies on his sword's pommel, thinking of the fabled rubies that would one day adorn his armor on the battlefield. Would it come to that? The future was uncertain. The swirl of prophecy was so often vague, but tonight's purpose was set in stone. The king's solar was dimly lit by a handful of flickering candles, the large hearth cold and empty. Aerys perched on a high-backed chair, with Lord Rossart standing behind him in the green-splashed robes of the pyromancers. Rossart had an obsequious expression, but there was a cunning glint in his eyes that made Rhaegar uneasy. He knew the man had been enabling Aerys's madness for years, feeding him illusions of unstoppable wildfire. His father beckoned Rhaegar forward, and the prince knelt carefully in front of the dais, the flicker of candlelight dancing across the polished metal scales of his armor. He had come armed, an unusual choice for such a meeting. But Aerys's paranoia had grown so pronounced that even this act did not trigger immediate suspicion. Everyone in the Red Keep was half expecting assassins at every turn. A prince wearing armor was hardly beyond reason in these times. "What is this plan you mentioned?" Aerys asked, sounding almost bored. His attention drifted, as if he was more interested in the dancing candle flames than in his own heir. "Speak quickly." Rhaegar rose, his gaze drifting over the table that held a heap of dusty parchment and half-drawn siege plans. "I have discovered a location beneath the city that would allow us to funnel wildfire directly below the rebel host, should they breach the city walls. It would be a single, devastating blow, ensuring no portion of the city need be destroyed in the process." He could hardly believe the words coming from his own lips. They were a fabrication carefully designed to coax Aerys's mania. He had tested the idea of luring his father out of the city, but there was no time for elaborate ruses. The king would never abandon his seat of power willingly. No, the only plan that might succeed was immediate and forceful. Rhaegar forced himself to remain calm, to appear collected, though his heart battered against his ribs. Rossart's eyes sparked with interest. "Below the rebel host, you say? Perhaps the old labyrinth near the dragon pit? Do you propose we lure them there somehow? Or is there a new tunnel we might use?" Aerys leaned forward, suddenly more interested. Yes, and then, once they are in place, we ignite it. A glorious green inferno, leaving them nothing but bones. Speak, my son. Tell me more." Rhaegar moved closer. He kept his tone measured, respectful. "We must be very cautious in its planning, father. The risk is that some portion of the fire would spread out of control. That is why I wanted to show you the records, the ancient Targaryen maps I found. They might hold the key to precise placement of the wildfire. It would allow us to destroy our enemies while sparing the city." He extended his hand to pass a rolled parchment. As Aerys stretched out his arm to take it, Rhaegar noticed his father's nails, thick and yellowed, curving like talons. The king's hand trembled, either from excitement or madness, and the candlelight cast twisted shadows over his face. With one fluid motion, Rhaegar seized the wrist of his father's outstretched arm. Aerys's eyes flared in furious disbelief, but the king's body had grown frail from neglect, from madness, and from a life that had rotted away any sense of discipline. Rhaegar unsheathed his sword with his free hand, the blade singing softly in the still air. Panic streaked across Rossart's face. The pyromancer reached for a hidden dagger, but Rhaegar shifted his footing, yanked Aerys upright, and placed the blade against the king's throat. "Rossart," he hissed, "you will not interfere. If you move, I will kill him instantly." His voice quavered despite his best efforts. He had never threatened his father before. The weight of the moment hung upon him like a heavy cloak. No prophecy had ever laid out precisely how one was to kill their own father in order to save a city. Rossart froze, the dagger falling from his fingers. His face had gone pallid. Rhaegar's eyes flicked to the doorway, but only the silent hush of the corridor lay beyond. Ser Barristan and Ser Jon waited some distance off, likely hearing nothing yet. Rhaegar had wanted to keep them innocent of the crime he was about to commit. Their loyalty to him might have prompted them to act, but he needed no witnesses. This was his burden alone. Aerys trembled under his son's grip. A moment of lucidity seemed to cross the mad king's face, fear blinking in his violet eyes. "Release me," he spat. "Traitor, kinslayer, you are my son. You cannot do this." Rhaegar felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes, but he forced them away. "Father, I do not wish to kill you, but your madness is going to burn the city. You have already spilled innocent blood. You are prepared to spill so much more. I cannot let that happen. Fool boy, Ares rasped. I am the king. I am the dragon. You will die for this. He tried to wrest free, but Rhaegar's strength, bolstered by desperation, held firm. Ares's eyes went wide with panic. Then cunning flickered. His free hand darted toward a ring on his finger, twisting as if trying to trigger some hidden device. Perhaps the ring was a sign to the pyromancers or some failsafe. Rhaegar saw it out of the corner of his vision and had no choice. He pressed the blade deeper, and Ares's words transformed into a bubbling cry. Blood slipped over the edge of the steel, bright red in the candlelight. In that harrowing moment, Rhaegar realized there was no going back. With grim resolve, he tore the sword across the king's throat in a swift, decisive stroke. Ares coughed once, a spatter of warm blood hitting Rhaegar's cheek, and then the mad king crumpled, lifeless. The last Targaryen crowned by rightful succession was dead by his own son's hand.